Welcome to the At Cash and Biz show, where it's our mission to highlight the positive impact being made by successful entrepreneurs in the medical cannabis industry. Now, here's the host of the At Cash and Biz show, Tim Strombel.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome into the At Cash and Biz show. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or www.cashandbiz.com. A very interesting topic on the show today. Going to be bringing in this lady in just a second. Her name is Dr. Sue Sisley. She is the Director of Medicinal Plant Science with Heliospectra. You've seen her, you've heard her if you're in the industry, stuff that they're doing right now at Heliospectra, and the research, especially as it relates to PTSD, is very exciting. So we're going to talk about a number of things in this episode, specifically the medical world. They've been hesitant about cannabis. So how is Sue getting involved? Why is she getting involved? PTSD, what is it? How is cannabis involved? Let's talk about vets and all these cool studies and research they're hopeful to do. And then we're going to talk about when these studies will be recognized as fact. That's one of the biggest things in the industry is you see these studies, but what's separating them from something that's really not recognizable in the industry? She knows what I'm talking about. She's giving me the nod. And then before we introduce her real quick, just want to let you guys know the podcast is being presented by Online Marijuana Design, the original and longest-lasting cannabis branding agency in North America. They've been featured on CNN Money, GeekWire, Huffington Post, MJ Business Daily, just to name a few. Check them out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at OMD Agency or online at omdagency.com. All right, without further ado, Sue, how are you this afternoon? Thanks for having us.
Oh, we're delighted to be here. Thank you.
We're posted up in your hotel room, just getting ready for the conference to get going here. Very exciting stuff all around. First of all, for this story and for this podcast, can you talk to us about your public exit from your previous employer? It's what a lot of people know your entrance into the cannabis world for. Can you talk about that and share with us what happened?
Yeah, you bet. That's one of my favorite stories because it's turned out to be a real gift to the movement. We ended up being terminated back on June 27th of 2014. I was stripped of all three of my contracts at the University of Arizona College of Medicine, where I'd been a faculty member in excellent standing for almost 8 years there. That was the university where I graduated from medical school. I was a proud donor, Wildcat for life, and unfortunately, I'd been at odds with the university administration for many years since achieving FDA approval for this important marijuana research. We actually managed to secure FDA approval in April of 2011. And you can see here we are, almost 5 years later, still unable to implement this study. And the university didn't make it any easier on us. They continually argued that this research was illegal, that it could never be accomplished on campus, and that they would never allow it. And even though we got IRB approval, the Institutional Review Board at the U of A approved the study back in October of 2012. But despite that, the university refused to allocate any space to us. And without the space, we could never get a DEA Schedule I license. We couldn't finalize our FDA, clinical approval. So we knew it was clear that the U of A could not contend with the optics of having veterans smoke marijuana on campus, and they decided instead to just stonewall the study and hope that we would go away. But I think they realized that that we were going to persevere until this thing was implemented. And so finally we were stripped of all the contracts with no due process, no fair hearing, as I wasn't tenured. But it turned out to be the best thing that happened to our research, where we got worldwide media attention after that. We gained a partnership with Johns Hopkins University, and we received a $2.2 million grant from the Colorado Health Department. So we've been thriving since then. The research has finally found a home after a year of searching endlessly throughout Arizona. We've secured a laboratory in North Phoenix, and we just had our DEA inspection. I've got private IRB approval now, and we're ready to move forward. The only thing we're waiting for is marijuana. We don't have study drug from the federal government.
Now, I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I obviously don't want to talk about this too much, but did it surprise you at all? I mean, you came up through Arizona. It was your baby. And then to see the lack of willingness to work with it, did that surprise you at all, or were you kind of expecting it?
No, I mean, I realize that we're in one of the most conservative states in the country, and a lot of elected officials had concerns about conducting marijuana research on a taxpayer-supported university campus. And so there were a few electeds that actually went on record and said that they didn't believe marijuana research was real science. And they actually said to reporters that they believed all marijuana research was just a strategy to promote marijuana legalization. And that was really offensive to all scientists worldwide because, we pride ourselves on creating study designs that eliminate human bias. I'm entering into this study with no preconceived notions about marijuana because I've never tried marijuana personally in any formulation. I'm a lifelong Republican, so I'm very conservative. I'm still dubious about marijuana as a treatment for PTSD. I'm pursuing this because I feel a duty to the veterans in this country who have, there's a mountain of anecdotal evidence from these veterans claiming that they are getting benefit from this plant. And I think we owe it to them to study it in a rigorous, controlled environment and once and for all collect true objective data and put it all into the public domain. The good and the bad of marijuana will all be published in a peer-reviewed medical journal so that everybody can scrutinize it and understand once and for all, does marijuana help? And if so, what strains are best for PTSD and maybe even which strains should be avoided. We're going to be examining 4 different phenotypes of smoked marijuana in these 76 military vets, and we'll hopefully be able to uncover some, to elucidate some answers to these vital questions that these veterans have had for so many years.
Now, what were you doing prior to the research of cannabis and prior to getting into wanting to study it as a plant and its effects towards PTSD?
Yeah, I'm just seeing patients full time. That's what I do. I'm a physician, so I see about 20 patients a day in my clinic, and over the last 20 years, I've been taking care of military vets, police, fire, all in my private practice, and I have heard more and more reports particularly from veterans who had the courage to disclose to me over about the last 10 years. They started coming out of the shadows and talking to me about their use of cannabis. They knew that I would be highly judgmental because they saw that I'm a very conservative doctor. I only covet FDA-approved medicines. So of course, when they first started disclosing this, I was, dismissive of their claims and tried to cajole them into, stopping the marijuana. Let's find you another prescription medicine. But I realized that none of the medicines I was giving these guys were helping them. And mostly it was just turning them into zombies where I would just I put them through the gauntlet of every FDA-approved medicine on the market, trying to find anything that would help relieve their suffering. And all it did was, render them non-functional because all these meds would, compete with each other and create all these drug interactions and side effects. And finally, the vets would just say, I'm not doing this anymore. I can't. They would become so demoralized by these repeated failed medication trials. And so they started teaching me about marijuana. I finally started to listen to them and stop judging them and start acknowledging the truth of their reports because you couldn't deny it after you'd hear not just all these credible veterans, but their family members. There was all this collateral history from their kids, from their wives saying, I got my husband back for the first time. This plant has given them a life again. And so I was really persuaded by that to at least do a real trial and understand, because right now all we have is observational studies, things that are not enough to compel the medical community to acknowledge that this is medicine. So
how have you seen cannabis affect PTSD? I mean, because for people who don't know, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, and you could define it more readily if you'd like. But it seems like the symptoms of PTSD are kind of the big combined ball of symptoms that cannabis already treats.
That's right. Yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing is, in psychiatry, we haven't come very far. So we continue to treat each target symptom with a different medicine. And that's how these vets end up snowballing onto 10 or 12 different meds when they come back from service. Is we try, they come in with insomnia, we give them some Ambien. They come in with depression, they get thrown onto Zoloft. We keep just accumulating more and more meds, and finally these guys start feeling like guinea pigs, and suddenly they discover marijuana. They're teaching each other. Veterans start have been there's a whole underground movement of vets, all these different groups like Weed for Warriors and Grow for Vets that are starting to share really important information with each other about how a single plant seems to be managing this entire constellation of PTSD. So PTSD is so complex, and it doesn't, in traditional medicine, it doesn't get treated with one prescription. It gets 6 to 12 prescriptions, but yet marijuana, this plant, is being used as monotherapy, as a single intervention by all these vets and other PTSD sufferers. So it's really a fascinating breakthrough that these patients have uncovered themselves. They've taught themselves what strains work best, and they're trying to teach the doctors, but the doctors aren't open to it yet. We're blocked, because we were talking earlier about how, none of the traditional physicians even learn about the endocannabinoid system. I never even was exposed to it all through med school and residency, and that's so crazy because the endocannabinoid system was uncovered in the 80s and kept being elucidated throughout the 90s, and yet there's not a single mainstream medical school that will even touch on it, and that's really shameful.
Do other physicians start to approach you as they see you in the space and want to know about cannabis and what's happening, or are you not seeing that?
No, I'm starting to see more and more docs ask questions and want to even participate in research. So that's been great. But none of them want to navigate all the awful barriers because they see what we've been through. Here we are 5 years later, and we still can't.
Go ahead and be the guinea pig.
Yeah,
we'll catch up
right.
Once the science is done. Let us know.
That's right. When you publish it, well, send me the article. So yeah, these guys though, they are starting to develop a real curiosity, because it's hard to ignore when you have more and more patients coming in and claiming that they're using the plant successfully, and the physicians are starting to realize that there is a legitimate science here. And if you do a simple PubMed search, you'll find hundreds of controlled trials published in peer-reviewed journals. It's just they don't rise to the level of randomized controlled trials, the gold standard that we're all hoping for. But there's still very compelling data out there, and I think that docs are starting to get it. But this is the tough thing. Without them being exposed to it during training, it's much harder to teach docs after they're, if firmly in practice and have all their mindsets solidified. But that's why it's so important. Hopefully this kind of information will start to infiltrate medical school curriculum eventually, because it's unbelievable to me that we've gone, so many decades. This endocannabinoid system, it's obvious that it is the most important homeostatic mechanism in the human body. Every human body has this, and the fact that the med schools aren't teaching it is just really, really sad.
Now, you've done a lot of work with PTSD, with veterans over your many years of medical experience. You wear a dog tag that has the 22 on it. Right. Can you talk to us about the significance of that, kind of how it came about and why that number might not be as specific as it should be?
Yeah, well, I've had a lot of vets in my own medical practice who've killed themselves over the last 20 years. And unfortunately, all of the vets in my practice who've killed themselves were all labeled an accident, when I knew, in fact, that these veterans were actively suicidal. If a veteran drives his motorcycle into a barricade at 100 miles an hour and he's had multiple suicide attempts in the past, it's pretty clear what that is. But, a coroner's office isn't going to go the distance to do the proper investigation to label something a suicide. It's easier for the government to just document it as an accident and move on to the next case. So that's what happens. Is this number 22 a day was actually put out by the VA system back in 2014, and it was already such a horrific number. Even though we know it's a low estimate, it's such a sickening public health crisis that we have, that the government isn't really acknowledging.
Why would you say it's a low estimate? I know you explained it earlier, but can you recap how it was kind of a limited pool of information?
That's right. Yeah, it was only 22 states reporting on that data from 2014, and a lot of the big states were missing. So California, Texas, Washington State were not part of that data collection. And then combined with the fact that most of the suicides of prescription overdoses are all labeled as accidents, you can imagine how this number could be actually more like 40 to 50 veterans per day killing themselves. And it is just, I mean, it is a very serious public health crisis. And the fact that the government has not only have they, you would think that our government would expedite a study like this. Here we are trying to uncover a potential new treatment for PTSD. And with the severity of this problem, you would think the government would try to move this study forward at lightning speed. And instead, 5 years later, we are still unable to get this underway because the government has actually stymied this work at every turn. And it's clear now to everyone that the U.S. government has systematically impeded marijuana efficacy research in this country. They will greenlight any marijuana studies looking at harmful side effects or addiction potential. That's what we call safety studies. NIDA will greenlight those studies quickly. They'll fully fund them and give them all the marijuana they want. But if you dare say you want to study the efficacy of marijuana, how effective is marijuana in treating a certain illness, those are the studies that get stonewalled. They get put into sort of a permanent review process where they never emerge. That's the problem. And that's why there's so few physicians who want to embark on this research, because they know what the obstacles are.
Can you talk about what you're doing now at Heliospectra and the studies and obviously PTSD? And then I want to also make sure we touch on the Native American angle, but we'll get to that in just a second. So what's going on with Heliospectra?
Yeah, well, Heliospectra, I was so grateful that they picked this up right after I got terminated from the U of A, because there's many Heliospectra employees that are actually alums of the U of A and were really outraged by the injustice of this firing. So they immediately moved to bring us under their umbrella and try to help us find a new resource. So they've been trying, first of all, helping us build awareness about this epidemic of veteran suicide. Heliospectra has taken a very strong interest in trying to help the veteran community, even though they, build lamps, these wonderful LED lamps, but they also are striving to use their unique light recipes. They have complete control of the light spectrum with these lamps, so they can create very unique plant genetics. And possibly, we're starting to see the growers who are utilizing these lamps in particular able to create hybrids of marijuana that are truly unique and that may be specifically useful in treating PTSD. So that's what we're trying to understand is what type. So they're involved in a very important strain science that will eventually uncover, I think, some unique therapeutic interventions for PTSD and a variety of other conditions that veterans suffer with.
We're talking with Dr. Sue Sisley, the Director of Medicinal Plant Science at Heliospectra, in relation to a number of other things. She's a speaker at an event that we're actually going to be at tomorrow. We're at Harrah's in Southern California right now, where the event is taking place, featuring a bunch of Native American involvement. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. Just want to let people know the podcast, proudly presented by our friends at Online Marijuana Design. Once again, the preeminent packaging, marketing, and design agency in the cannabis industry. If you're interested in taking your brand to the next level, make sure you hit them up, omdagency.com, omdagency.com. Sue, back to our conversation. You're speaking at the Native American Marijuana and Hemp Conference and Expo this week. Why?
Well, I'm thrilled to have a chance to talk with the Native American community about a plant that they know well. I mean, let's face it, these guys are real experts in this and how this plant works. But now there's an opportunity for the Native American community to embrace marijuana as a new industry and actually create sustainable jobs, not just, from casinos and other traditional economic development routes, but look at the possibility of growing industrial hemp, creating jobs, manufacturing jobs from processing and producing different formulations of cannabis. So I think this is terrific. It's such a natural fit for the Native American population to be able to look at all the different ways. I think one of the tribes in Arizona has already reached out to us in a very formal way about hosting our marijuana research. And I think that's a perfect first step for them to house federally regulated marijuana research on their reservation and be able to get their feet wet with the, and see that this is a plant that has actually been unfairly vilified for so many, centuries here. Or I should say so many decades. It's actually, unfortunately, a lot of the tribal leaders still perceive this as a potential detriment. And so the idea is now they're coming here to learn, to get objective information at this conference about how marijuana works. So my lecture is going to be basically an overview of marijuana as medicine. What is the real data that show, the published data that confirms that marijuana does have true therapeutic benefits, and then to talk with them about some of the history that has created this situation where marijuana has been completely, how do you say, sorry,
vilified?
Yeah, there you go. Vilified and just and cast aside as if it's a deeply dangerous, highly toxic. The truth is that this plant has remarkably low toxicity. It's probably much less harmful than most of the medicines that I prescribe to patients every day. And so I'm hoping to impart that to the Native American community and help them to see that there's a great potential here for them to find, to create a new path for economic development, but also to create to possibly provide harm reduction, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Where this could be a very useful public health intervention for the, they have an epidemic of alcoholism and opioid abuse and all kinds of other things that might be able to benefit from cannabis as sort of adjunctive treatment and getting off a lot of that stuff.
Talking with Dr. Sue Sisley, who's, by the way, we've mentioned it before, never tried cannabis. Okay, you're a physician, which is another conservative realm, typically, of people who aren't necessarily into cannabis or the knowledge of cannabis. And then she's someone who has done the practice. You've given the vets the drugs that the government has told you to give them, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you've realized it's not working the way it should. These deaths aren't being prevented. Yep. Really what's happening isn't being treated. And so you are one of those who's leading the way of saying, hey, there's got to be a better way. Let's find out what that is. So we think that's really cool, especially on our end at Cash and Biz, because we're really into that. You're also lined up to speak in Arizona in a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. What do you think is making you and what you're doing in Heliospectra so in demand on the speaking circuit?
Yeah, I think it's just people are fascinated by marijuana research in general. I think they're curious. How does how do you fashion a study design around this plant, and how is it conducted? So there's an immense curiosity from the public. There's also the capacity of the public to empathize with our saga. A lot of the public have been following this whole odyssey since we first got, we submitted our study design to the FDA in 2010, and we got an unbelievable amount of media attention back then, hailing the study as a triumph, and how excited the public was about the fact that we were finally going to get to study marijuana for PTSD. And here, so many years later, we're still stuck in limbo, waiting now for another absurd situation that we have to buy marijuana from the federal government. That I am surrounded by expert growers throughout California here who could have grown marijuana to spec for us within 2 to 3 months. And yet now I'm waiting. This is 18 months now that I've been waiting for marijuana study drug, because there's only one federally legal source. NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has a government-enforced monopoly on the only federally legal supply of marijuana. And so I have to ignore all these incredible growers who have all of the strains that we've requested and instead use a very substandard marijuana from the feds.
Now that's going to go down in Arizona. I have to ask you the awkward question. Are you inviting any of your former colleagues from Arizona to your lecture?
Oh, yeah. We've invited. It's an open door for sure. We would love to have them. We'd love to have them on the research team. And we've invited all the U of A students if they want to participate and volunteer, we'd love to. I think that that's the saddest thing to me, that of being terminated from the university, is that we don't have a mechanism to formally bring students onto the team and have them be co-authors on our paper later. And so we'll do it, any way we can. But I want the U of A to know I wish them the very best. I don't have any ill will. It's just there was a few people at the top level, a few of those administrators that were really short-sighted. But overall, I'm still a huge fan of the U of A, and I'm a dedicated Wildcat, and I appreciate all the hardworking men and women in the trenches there who keep that university going. And I predict that in 5 to 6 years that we will be back at the U of A doing the very research that was terminated, because I think eventually they will recognize what a giant error in judgment that was, and they will see that not only have they lost a golden opportunity to answer the vital questions of our day here, but they also, are losing out on a tremendous amount of potential research funding that could have enabled this kind of science to thrive there.
Now, as a trained medical professional, you've dealt with these studies, countless times over the years, really. How many studies like this and like the one you're planning on PTSD do you think it's going to take before people start to kind of listen towards the evidence? Because you're talking about government-sanctioned studies.
Yeah, it's unclear. I think the key is once we get published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, it's going to be tough for mainstream medicine to ignore this anymore. So our study, this is an early phase trial. It's phase 2 of the FDA. So our hope is to put whole plant marijuana through the entire FDA drug development process. Starts with this study. Phase 2 is the first step, and then it goes to phase 3. If the data from phase 2 looks favorable, the FDA would greenlight us to go to phase 3. And then after phase 3, if that data is compelling enough, the FDA would approve whole plant marijuana to be on the market. It would have an FDA indication to treat PTSD. So suddenly that would be the biggest game changer ever, because then insurance companies would be required to provide marijuana on formulary. I mean, they wouldn't have to pay for it entirely, but they would be required to subsidize it. And that would be a tremendous gift to all these sick and debilitated patients who are on disability and can't afford their daily marijuana intake. That would be tremendous. And, there's a model already for this in Israel and Canada. Israel, I believe that marijuana is on 2 of the 3 national health plans there. So it's already, there's countries, forward-thinking countries who have the sensibility to realize that, this cannabis is, working. It appears to be working wonders for many patients, and it is appropriate for the government to subsidize this, especially if it enables patients to walk away from a lot of their much more addictive, toxic, FDA-approved meds.
What do you do in your free time, Sue?
I on the board of a professional theater company called Phoenix Theater. I've been on that about 12 years now. And, my favorite thing is really supporting live theater. And I do a lot of work with another charity called Stepping Stones of Hope. We have a children's grief camp that we, participate in up north in Payson. So that's my favorite. But my, obviously my real passion is trying to work with these vets. And we have a new nonprofit that was just launched in Washington State called 22 Too Many, where we just were at Seattle Hempfest, letting the public know that that this is really my most exciting thing, that I'm seeing this new veterans activism where vets are starting to make their voices heard in front of elected officials, and so that's what I want to support. I don't have kids, so for me, a lot of these vets feel like my kids, and I get a lot of gratification out of working side by side with them.
For people who don't necessarily know the medical side or aren't up to date with the studies as they happen, is there a place that you go to update yourself and find this information? Where should people really look to keep up to date?
Yeah, the most official place is PubMed, if you do a simple PubMed search, but there's also a really nice compilation on Americans for Safe Access. If you go to safeaccess.org, they have an excellent group under different conditions. It lists different studies. The other thing I want to let your folks know about is we're going to be updating people about the study itself, the progress of the PTSD research on the Facebook page. I have Sue Sisley, MD, official page. If they like that page, then it will give them regular updates about where things are at and when. And we're going to need the help of the public to get veterans referred to this 800 number. Eventually, once we're able to buy marijuana from the federal government, we'll create an 800 number where vets can voluntarily call in and be screened. And we'll need to screen 500 or 600 vets in order to find those optimal 76 that meet all the inclusion and exclusion criteria.
Now, you're one of the first studies that will be official in the space, but you're saying this isn't going to be an overnight thing. How long does this whole process really take?
It's probably going to be 2 years in order to get the entire cohort enrolled and through the process, because not everybody gets enrolled up front. So the veterans will be staggered enrollment over probably the course of a year and a half. And so it's a 12-week process. We have a lot of vets who've contacted us already saying that they're willing to relocate from other states. They feel that this work is so crucial that they'll do anything to help advance the body of science. So I am so grateful that we have so many dedicated vets who want to do that.
As we mentioned a couple times earlier, you're hearing this podcast crystal clear HD sound because one of our favorite sponsors, Online Marijuana Design. If you've been living under a cannabis rock, they are the absolute leaders in all things design, marketing, and branding. Hit them up today. They'll help you out with all the stuff you need to make your cannabis business successful and make your goals met. You know what I mean? OnlineMarijuanaDesign.com or OMDAgency.com. Sue, this has been fantastic. Did we hit everything we wanted to? I really think we did.
I think so too. And if anyone wants to read the study design, it's maps.org. They're my sponsor, and they're a nonprofit based out of Santa Cruz. So if you go to maps.org and click on marijuana research, you'll see our entire protocol has been posted. We want to be 100% transparent with the public, and we want, we're eager to get your feedback about this. So please stay in touch with us.
Transparency is the key. A big thanks to Sue. Once again, you can catch her. Really just keep an eye out for what she's doing. Follow her fan page, the official Sue Sisley fan page on Facebook. You do updates as to where you're going to be speaking and that kind of stuff?
That's right. We will, yeah.
Very exciting stuff. Well, that's going to do it for us. My name's been Tim Strombel. This has been the At Cash and Biz Show. Thank you for listening to us wherever you are, iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or www.cashandbiz.com. We will see you guys next time at Cash and Biz. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the At Cash and Biz Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our feed and check out our social media. We want you to stay in front of the green rush.